Chapter 20. Jonathan Harker's Journal. 1st October, evening. I found Mr. Thomas Sneedling in his house at Benthall Green, but unhappy that he was not in any condition to remember anything. The very prospect of beer which my expected coming had opened up to him had proved too much, and he already begun too early on his expected debauch. I learned, however, from his wife, who seemed a decent poor soul, that he was the only assistant to Smollett, who of the two mates was the responsible person. So off I drove to Walworth, and found Mr. Joseph Smollett at his home and in his shirt-sleeves, taking a late tea out of a saucer. He's a decent, intelligent fellow, distinctly a good, reliable type of workman, with a headpiece of his own. He remembered all about the incident with the boxes, and from a wonderful dog-eared notebook which he produced from some mysterious receptacle about the seat of his trousers, and which had some hieroglyphical entries in thick, half-obliterated pencil. He gave me the directions of the boxes. There were, he said, 6 in the cartload which he took from Carfax to and left at 197 Chicksand Street, Mile End, Newton, and another 6 which he deposited at Jamaica Lane, Bermondsey. If then the Count meant to scatter these ghastly refuges of his all over London, these places were chosen as the first of delivery, so that later he might distribute more fully. The systematic manner on which this was done made me think that he could not only mean to confine himself onto just 2 sides of London. He was now fixed on the far east end of the northern shore, on the east side of the southern shore, and on the south. The north and west were surely never meant to be left out of his diabolical scheme, let alone the city itself, and the very heart of fashionable London on the southeast side and west. I went back to Smollett and asked him if he could tell us anything of the boxes that had been taken from Carfax. He replied, "Well, Governor, you've treated me very handsome." I had given him half a sovereign. "And I'll tell you all I know. I heard about a man by the name of Bloxam about 4 nights ago, in the area and out in the Pincher's Alley, and how he had and his mate and a rusty dog job on the old house in Perfect. There ain't a many jobs such as that around here, and I'm thinking maybe Sam Bloxam could tell you something." I asked him if he could tell me where to find him. I told him that if he could give me the address, it would be worth another half sovereign to him. So he gulped down the rest of his tea and stood up, saying that he was going to begin the search then and there. At the door he stopped and said, "Look here, Governor. There ain't no sense in me keeping you here. I might find Sam soon, or mightn't. But anyhow, he ain't likely to be in the way to tell you much tonight. Sam is a rare one when he starts on the booze. If you can give me an envelope with a stamp on it and your address, I'll find out where Sam is to be found and post ye tonight. But you better hurry up out of here as soon as I'm in the morning, or maybe I won't catch him, for Sam gets off mainly early. Never mind the booze the night before." This was all practical. So one of the children went off with a penny to buy an envelope and a sheet of paper, and to keep the change. When she came back, I addressed the envelope and stamped it, and when Smollett was again fatefully promised to post the address where found, I took my way home. We're on the track anyway. I'm tired tonight and I want to sleep. Mina is fast asleep and looks a little too pale. Her eyes look as though she had been crying. Poor dear. I've never doubted frets her to be kept in the dark. It makes her doubly anxious about me and the others. But it is better to be disappointed and worried in such a way now than to have her nerve be broken. The doctors were quite right to insist on her being kept out of this dreadful business. For this particular burden of silence must rest. I shall not ever enter on the subject with her under any circumstances. Indeed, it may not be a hard task after all, for she herself has become reticent on the subject, and having not spoken of the Count or his doings ever since we told her of our decision. 2nd October, evening. A long and trying and exciting day. By the first post I got my directed envelope from a dirty scrap of paper enclosed, On it was written in carpenter's pencil in a sprawling hand, Sam Bloxam, Corcoran's 4, Putish Court, Bartell Street, Walworth. Ask for the despite. I got the letter in the bed and rose without waking Mina. She looked heavy and sleepy and pale, and far from well. I determined not to wake her, but that, when I should return with the news from the new search, I would arrange for her to go back to Exeter. I think she would be happier in our own home, with her daily tasks to interest her, than in being here amongst us and in ignorance. I only saw Dr. Seward for a moment, and told him where I was off to, promising to come back and tell the rest so soon as I would have found anything out. I drove to Walworth, and found, with some difficulty, Potter's Court. Mr. Smollett's spelling misled me, as I asked for Pooter's Court instead of Potter's Court. However, when I had found the court, I had no difficulty in discovering Corcoran's lodging house. When I asked the man who came to the door for the deputy, he shook his head and said, "I don't know him. There ain't no such person around here. I never heard of him in all my bloomin' days. Don't believe there ain't even any of that kind living here or anywheres." I took Smollett's letter, and as I read it, it seemed to me that the lesson of the spelling of the name of the court might guide me. "What are you?" I asked. "I'm the deputy," he answered. I saw at once that I was on the right track. Phonetic spelling had again misled me. A half-crown tip to the deputy's knowledge at my disposal, and I learned that Mr. Bloxam, who had slept off the remains of his beer the previous night at Corcoran's, had left for his work at Poplar's and at 5 o'clock in the morning. He couldn't tell me where the place of work was situated, but he had a vague idea that it was some kind of newfangled warehouse. And with this slender clue, I set off to Poplar. It was 12 o'clock before I got any satisfactory hint of such a building, and this I got at a coffee shop, where some workmen had been having their dinner. One of these suggested that there was being erected across Angel Street a new cold storage building, and that this suited the condition of a newfangled warehouse. I at once drove to it. An interview with a surly gatekeeper and an even surlier foreman, both of whom were praised with the coin of the realm, put me on track to Bloxam. He was sent for on my suggesting, as that I was willing to pay his day's wages to his foreman for the privilege of asking him a few questions on a private matter. He was a smart enough fellow, though rough in speech and bearing. When I promised to pay for his information, he gave me an earnest, told me that he had made 2 journeys between Carfax and a house in Piccadilly, and had taken from the house to the latter 9 great boxes, main heavy ones, with horse and cart hired him for this purpose. I asked me if he could tell me the number of the house in Piccadilly, to which he replied, "Well, governor, I forgets the number, but it was only a few doors from a big white church or something like that. Not long built. It was a dusty old house, though nothing to the dustiness of the house took the blue-in boxes from." "How did you get into the house if they were both empty?" "There was the old party what engaged me waiting at the house at Perfect. He helped me lift the boxes and put 'em in the dray. Curse me, but he was the strongest trap I ever struck. And him an old fella, too, with a white mustache, one that think he wouldn't be able to throw over slander." How this phrase thrilled me through. "Why, he took 'em up as is every end of the box, like he weighed like they was pounds of tea, and me a puffing and a blowing before I could even make mine up anyways, and I ain't no chicken neither." How did you get into the house in Piccadilly?" I asked. "It was there too. Must have started off and got there before me. For when I rung on the bell, he came and opened the door himself. He even helped me carry the boxes into 'em all." "The whole 9? I asked. "Yes. It was 5 in the first load and 4 in the second. It was main drawer work, and I don't do so well remembering how I got 'em home." I interrupted him. "Were the boxes left in the hall?" "Yes. It was only big and all, and there was nothing else in it." I made one more attempt to further matters. "You didn't have any key?" Never used no key or nothing. The old gent, he opened the door himself and shut it again when I drove off. Don't remember the last time, but that was the beer.
And you can't remember the number of the house?
No, sir, but you needn't have no difficulty about that. It's high up in the stone front with a bow on it, and it has high steps to the door. I know them steps, having carried their boxes up 3 loafers from what come round to earn a copper. The old gent give me a shilling, and then seeing them they got so much, they wanted more. So he took 'em one by the shoulder and was like to throw 'em down the steps, till the lot of them went away cussing.
I thought this description I could find with the house, so having paid my friend for his information, I started off for Piccadilly. I gained a new painful experience. The Count could, it was evident, handle the earth boxes himself. If so, time was precious. For now he could achieve a certain amount of distribution. He could, by choosing his own time, complete the task unobserved. At Piccadilly Circus, I discharged my cab and walked westward, beyond Junior Constitutional. I came across the house described, and was satisfied that this was the next of the Lairs arranged by Dracula. The house looked as though it had been long untented. The windows were encrusted with dust, and the shutters were up. All the framework was black with time, and from the iron the paint had mostly scaled away. It was evident that up till lately there had been a large notice board in front of the balcony. It had, however, been roughly torn away. The uprights, which had been supported, were still remaining. Behind the rails of the balcony I saw there were some loose boards, whose raw edges looked white. I would have given a good deal to have been able to see the notice board intact, as it would, perhaps, give some clue as to the ownership of the house. I remembered my experience with the investigation and purchase of Carfax, and could not but feel that if I could find the former owner, there might be some means to discover gaining access to the house. There, at present, nothing to be learned from the Piccadilly side, and nothing could be done, so I went around to the back to see if there was anything to be gathered from this quarter. The mews were active. The Piccadilly houses were being mostly in occupation. I asked 1 or 2 of the grooms and helpers, whom I saw around, if they could tell me anything about the empty house. One of them said that he had heard it had lately been taken, but he couldn't say from who. He told me, however, that up to very lately there had been a notice board of "for sale" up, and that perhaps Mitchell's Sons and Candy, the house agents, could tell me something, as he thought he remembered seeing the names of that firm on the board. I didn't wish to seem too eager to let my informant know or guess too much, so, thanking him in the usual manner, I strolled away. It was now growing dusk, and the autumn night was closing in, so I didn't lose any time. Having learned the address of Mitchell's Sons and Candy from a directory at the Berkeley, I was soon at their office in Sackville Street. The gentleman who saw me was particularly suave in manner, but uncommunicative in equal portion. Having once told me that the Piccadilly house, which throughout our interview he called a mansion, was sold, he considered my business as concluded. When I asked who had purchased it, he opened his eyes a thought wider and paused a few seconds before replying, "It is sold, sir." "Pardon me," I said, with equal politeness, "but I have a special reason for wishing to know who purchased it." Again he paused longer, raising his eyebrows still more. "It is sold, sir," was again his lactic reply. "Surely," I said, "you don't mind telling me what you to know so much." "But I do mind," he answered. "The affairs of their clients are absolutely safe in the hands of Mitchell's Sons and Candy." There was a magnificent pring of the first water, and there was no use in arguing with him. I thought it'd be best to meet him on his own ground, so I said, "Your clients, sir, are happy in having so resolute a guardian of their confidence. I am myself a professional man." Here I handed him my card. "In this instance, I am not prompted by curiosity. I act on part of Lord Godalming, who wishes to know something about the property for which he understood was lately for sale." This put a different complexion on the matters. He said, I would like to oblige you if I could, Mr. Harker, and especially if I would like to oblige his lordship. We once carried out a small matter of renting out some chambers for him when he was the Honourable Arthur Holmwood. If you will let me have his lordship's address, I will consult the house on the subject, and at will, in case, communicate with his lordship by tonight's post. It will be a pleasure if we can so far deviate from our rules as to give the required information to his lordship. I wanted to secure a friend and not make an enemy, so I thanked him, gave him the address of Dr. Seward's, and came away. It was now dark, and I was tired and hungry. I got a cup of tea at the Arid Bread Company and came down to Purfleet on the next train. I found the others at home. Mina was looking tired and pale, but she made a gallant effort to be bright and cheerful. It wrung my heart to think that I had to keep anything from her and caused her inquietude. Thank God this would be the last night for her to look upon our conferences and feel the sting of our not showing our confidence. It took all my courage to hold to the wise resolution of keeping her out of our grim task. She seemed somehow more reconciled, or at least the very subject seemed to have become more repugnant to her, for when any accidental allusions is made, she actually shudders. I am glad we made our resolution in time, as with such a feeling as this, our growing knowledge would be torture to her. I could not tell the others of the day's discovery till we were all alone, so after dinner, followed by a little music to save appearances even amongst ourselves, I took Mina to her room and left her to go to bed. The dear girl was more affectionate with me than ever, and clung to me as if she would detain me. But there was much to talk about, and I came away. Thank God the ceasing tellings of things had made no difference between us. When I came down again, I found the others had gathered around the fire in the study. In the train I had written my diary so far, and simply read off to them the best means of letting them know abreast of my information. When I had finished, Van Helsing said, This has been a good day for work, friend Jonathan. Doubtless we are on the track of the missing boxes. If we find them all in the house, then means our work is near the end. But if there is some missing, we must search until we find them. Then we shall make a final coup and hunt the wretch to his real death. We all sat in silence for a while. At once, Mr. Morris spoke. Say, how do we know how we going to get into that house? We could go into the other, answered Lord Glaudeming quickly. But that's different. We broke house at a Carfax, but we had night and a wall park to protect us. It'd be a mighty different thing to commit burglary in Piccadilly, either by day or night. I confess I don't see how we're going to be able to get in unless that agency duck can find us a key of some sort. Perhaps we shall know that you get that letter in the morning. Lord Glaudeming's brows contracted, and he stood up and walked about the room. By and by he stopped and said, turning from one to another of us, Quincy's head is level. The burglary business is getting serious. We got off once all right, but now we have a rare job on hand, unless we can find the Count's key basket. As nothing as well can be done before morning, and as could be at least unavoidable to wait until Lord Glaudeming should hear from Mitchelson, we decided to take our active steps before breakfast time. For a good while we sat and smoked and discussed the matter in various lights and bearings. I took the opportunity to bring this diary right up to that moment. I am very sleepy and shall go to bed. Just a line. Mina sleeps soundly, and her breath is regular. Her forehead is puckered into little wrinkles, as though she thinks in her sleep. She's still too pale, but doesn't look so haggard as she did this morning. Tomorrow will, I hope, mend all of this. She will be herself at our home in Exeter. Oh, but I am so sleepy. Dr. Seward's Diary. 1st October. I am puzzled afresh above Renfield. His moods change so rapidly I find it difficult to keep in touch with them, and as they always mean something more than his own well-being, they form a more than interesting study. This morning, When I went to see him after his repulse of Van Helsing, his manner was that of a man commanding destiny. He was, in fact, commanding destiny, subjectively. He did not really care for any of the things of mere earth. He was in the clouds and looked down with all the weakness and wants of us poor mortals. I thought I would improve the occasion and learn something, so I asked, "What about the flies this time?" He smiled on me in quite a superior sort of way, such a smile that would become famous of Malvolio, and he answered me, "The fly, my dear sir, has one striking feature. Its wings are typical of the aerial powers of the psychic faculties. The ancients did well when they typified the soul as a butterfly." I thought I would push his analogy to its utmost logical rigidity, so I said quickly, "Oh, it is the soul that you are after now, is it?" His madness foiled his reason, and a puzzled look spread across his face, shaking his head with a decision which I had but seldom seen in him. He said, "Oh, no. I want no souls. Life is all I want." Here he brightened up. "I am pretty indifferent about it at present. Life is all right. I have all I want. You must get a new patient, doctor, if you wish to study zoophagy." This puzzled me a little, so I drew on him. "Then you command life. You are a god, I suppose." He smiled with an ineffable benign superiority. "Oh, no. Far be it from me to aggregate to myself the attributes of the deity. I am not even concerned in his special spiritual doings. If I may state my intellectual position, I am, so far as concerns things purely terrestrial, somewhat in the position in which Enoch occupied spiritually." This was a poser to me. I could not at the moment recall Epoch's hypothesis, so I asked a simple question, though I felt by doing so I would be lowering myself in the eyes of this lunatic. "And what with Enoch?" "Because he walked with God." I could not see the analogy, but did not like to admit it, so I harked back with what he denied. "So you don't care about life, and you don't want souls. Why not?" I put my question quickly and somewhat sternly, on the purpose to discourage him. The effort succeeded. For an instant he unconsciously relapsed into his old servile manner, bent low before me, and actually fawned upon me as he replied, "I don't want any souls, indeed. I don't. I couldn't use them if I had them. They would be no manner of use to me. I couldn't eat them, or—" He suddenly stopped, and the old cunning look spread across his face, like a wind swept on the surface of water. "And, doctor, as to life, what is it after all? When you've got all you require, and you know you will never want, that is all. I have friends, good friends, like you, Dr. Seward." This was said with a leer of inexpressible cunning. "I know I shall never lack the means of life." I think that through the cloudiness of his insanity he saw some antagonism in me, for all at once he fell back on the last refuge as such as he, a dogged silence. After a short time he saw that for the present it was useless to speak to him. He was sulky, so I came away. Later that day he sent for me. Ordinarily I would not have come without any special reason, but just at present I am so interested in him that I would gladly make an effort. Besides, I am glad to have anything to help me pass the time. Harker is out following up on clues, and so are Glordamine and Quincy. Van Helsing sits in my study, poring over the records prepared by the Harkers. He seems to think that by accurate knowledge of all the details he will light upon some clue. He does not wish to be disturbed in his work without cause. I would have taken him with me to see the patient, only I thought after his last repulse he might not care to go again. There was also another reason. Renfield might not speak so freely before a third person when he and I are alone. I found him sitting on the middle of the floor with his stool, a pose in which greatly indicative of some mental energy on his part. When I came in, he said all at once, as though the question had been waiting on his lips, "What about souls?" It was evident that my surmise had been correct. Unconscious cerebration was at its work, even with the lunatic. I determined to have the matter out. "What about them yourself?" I asked. He didn't reply for a moment, but looked around him, up and down, as though he expected to find some inspiration for an answer. "I don't want any souls," he said in a feeble, apologetic way. The matter seemed preying on his mind, so I determined to use it, to be cruel only to be kind. So I said, "You like life, and you want life." "Oh, yes, but that is all right. You needn't worry about that." "But," I asked, "how are we going to get the life without getting the soul also?" This seemed to puzzle him, so I followed up. "A nice time you'll have some time when you're flying out there, with souls of hundreds of flies and spiders and birds and cats buzzing and twittering and mewing about round you. You've got their lives, you know, and you must put up with their souls." Something seemed to affect his imagination, for he put his fingers to his ears and shut his eyes, screwing them so tightly as a small boy does when his face is being soaped. There was something pathetic in the way that touched me. It also gave me a lesson, for it seemed that before me was only a child. Though the features were worn and the stubble of his jaw were white, it was evident that he was undergoing some process of mental disturbance, and knowing that his past moods had interpreted things seemingly foreign to himself, I thought I might enter into his mind as well as I could and go with him. The first step was to restore confidence, so I asked him, speaking pretty loud so that he would hear me through his closed ears, "Would you like some sugar to get your flies round again?" He seemed to wake up all at once and shook his head. With a laugh, he replied, "Not so much. Flies are poor things after all." After a pause, he added, "I don't want their souls buzzing round me all the same." "Well, spiders," I went on. "Blow spiders! What's the use of spiders? There isn't anything of them to eat or—" Suddenly, he stopped, as if reminded of a forbidden topic. So, I thought to myself, this is the second time that he has suddenly stopped at the word drink. What does it mean? Renfield himself seemed to be aware of having made a lapse, for he hurried on as though to distract my attention from it. "I don't take any stock at all in such matters. Rats and mice and small deer, as Shakespeare said it, chicken feed on the law of the larder, they might be called. I'm past all such nonsense. You might as well ask a man to eat molecules with a pair of chopsticks as they are to interest me about the lesser carnivora. For when I know what is before me..." "I see," I said. "You want big things that you can make your teeth meet in. How would you like to have breakfast on an elephant?" "What ridiculous nonsense are you talking about?" He was getting too wide awake, so I thought to press him hard. "I wonder," I said reflectively, "what's an elephant's soul like?" What the effect I had a desire obtained, for he all at once fell from his high horse and became a child again. "I don't want an elephant's soul, or any soul at all," he said. For a few moments he sat despondently. Suddenly he jumped to his feet with his eyes blazing and all signs of intense cerebral excitement. "To hell with you and your souls!" he shouted. "Why do you plague me about souls? Haven't I got enough to worry and pain and distract me already without thinking of souls?" He looked so hostile that I thought that he was in another one of his homicidal fits, so I blew my whistle. The instant, however, that I did, he seemed to become calm and said apologetically, "Forgive me, Doctor. I forget myself. You don't need any help. I am so worried in my mind that I am apt to be irritable. If only you knew the problem I had to face, and I was working out, you would pity and tolerate and pardon me. Pray do not put me in a strait waistcoat. I want to think, and I can't think freely when my body is confined. I'm sure you will understand." He had evidently self-control, for when the attendants came, I told him not to mind, and they withdrew. Renfield watched them go. When the door closed, he said with considerable dignity and sweetness,
Dr. Stewart, you've been very considerate towards me. Believe me, I am very, very grateful to you. I thought I would well to leave him in this mood, so I came away. There is certainly something to ponder over this man's state. Several points seem to make it clear what the American interviewer called a story, if one could get them in the proper order. And here they are. Will not mention drinking. Fears the thought of being burdened with the soul of anything. Has no dread of wanting life in the future. Despises the meaner forms of life altogether, though he dreads being hunted by their souls. Logically, all these things point one way. He has assurances of some kind that he will acquire some higher form of life. He dreads the consequence, the burden of the soul. Then it's a human life he looks to. And the assurance. Merciful God! The Count has been to him. And there is some new scheme of terror afoot. Later, I went after my rounds to Van Helsing and told him of my suspicion. He grew very grave, and after thinking of the matter for over a while, asked me to take him to Renfield. I did so. As we came to the door, we heard the lunatic within singing gaily, as he used to do in the time which now seems so long ago. When we entered, we saw with amazement that he had spread out his sugar as old. The flies, lethargic within the autumn, were beginning to buzz in the room. We tried to make him talk of the subject of our previous conversation, but he would not attend. He went on with his singing, just as though we were not even present. He got a scrap of paper and was folding it into a notebook. We had to come away as ignorant as we went in. His is a curious case indeed. We must watch him tonight. Letter. Mitchell, Sons and Candy to Lord Godalming. 1st October. My lord, we are at all times only too happy to meet your wishes. We beg, with regret, to the desire of your lordships expressed by Mr. Harker on your behalf, to supply the following information concerning the sale of and purchase of number 347 Piccadilly. The original vendors are the executors of the late Mr. Archibald Winters Shutfield. The purchaser is a foreign noble, Count de Ville, who effected the purchase, himself paying the purchase money in notes over the counter, if your lordship will pardon us using so vulgar an expression. Beyond this we know nothing whatsoever of him. We are, my lord, your most humble servants, Mitchell, Sons and Candy. 2nd October. Dr. Seward's diary. I placed a man in the corridor last night and told him to make an account of every note of any sound that he might hear from Renfield's room, and gave him instructions if there were anything strange, he was to call me. After dinner, when we had all gathered around the fire in the study, Mrs. Harker had gone to bed, we discussed the attempts and discoveries of the day. Harker was the only one who made any result, and we are in great hopes that his clue may be an important one. Before I go to bed, I went round to the patient's room and looked through the observation trap. He was sleeping soundly, and his heart rose and fell with regular respiration. This morning, the man on duty reported to me that a little after midnight he was restless and kept saying his prayers somewhat loudly. I asked him if that was all. He replied it was all he heard. There was something about his manner so suspicious that I asked him point-blank if he had been asleep. He denied sleep, but admitted having dozed for a while. It's too bad that men cannot be trusted unless they are watched. Today Harker is following up on his clue, and Art and Quincy are looking after the horses. Godalming thinks that it will all be well to have horses always in readiness, for when we get the information we seek, there will be no time to lose. We must sterilize all the important earth before sunrise and sunset. We shall thus catch the Count at his weakest, and without any refuge to fly to. Van Helsing is off to the British Museum to look at some authorities on ancient medicine. The older physicians took account of things which their followers do not accept. The professor is searching for witch and demon curses, which might be useful to us later. I sometimes think that we all must be mad, and we shall wake in the sanity of strait waistcoats. Later, we all met again. We seemed to be at last on the track,
and we now must work of tomorrow may be the beginning of the end. I wonder if Renfield's quiet has anything to do with this. His moods have so followed the doings of the Count that the coming destruction of the monster may be carried to him in some subtle way. If we can get some hint as to what passed in his mind between the time of my argument with him today and his repetitions of fly-catching, it might afford us a valuable clue. He is now seemingly quiet for a spell. Is he? That wild yell came from his room. The attendant came bursting into the room and told me that Renfield had somehow met with some kind of accident. He heard him yell, and when he went, he found him lying on his face on the floor, all covered in blood. I must go at once.